missed him, and he said he'd be here. Okay, well, unless there are any objections, we will be at least calling the meeting to order, and hopefully Brian will join us here shortly. We do have a quorum, and we will start with introductions. My name is Brandy Williams. I represent the City of Fountain. Ben?
Ben Sheets, City of Woodland Park.
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Anton Ramage, El Paso County.
Bob Daskovich, Town of Palmer Lake.
Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County.
Taylor Gertz representing Manitou Springs.
Wade Burkholder, City of Manitou Springs.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson Palms.
Tim Grazer, PPACG.
And Glenn Lesky Peterson.
Aaron Horsemeyers, Freezer Air Force.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
And in the audience, we'll start with Tim. Go ahead, Tim.
Two more.
Patty Henshin, CDOT Region 2.
Jessica McMullen with PPACG.
Tim Kirby, member CIT Quarters Office. I manage the MU and Regional Planning section of the department.
And staff?
Jennifer Valentine, PPACG staff.
Kevin Reyes, PPACG.
Thank you. And I can hand this over to Brian. We can approve the agenda between now and then. Can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hopefully there's no changes to the agenda. You ready, Brian?
Sure. Thank you. Apologize for being late.
We're on public comment.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. We're at item 3, public comments. Are there any comments for items not on the agenda? Seeing none?
I
Jennifer.
just want to mention, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be leaving here at 2:30. I have another commitment, so I just want to let you know. And then, since I won't be here for member entity announcements, I just want to let you know that El Paso County is taking the lead on a grant application for I-25. We're working with CDOT, and we are making an application to obtain funding for the improvements to I-25 on the Gap. It's a $350 million project that we're estimating, and money coming from El Paso County, Douglas County, some other local entities, as well as Senate Bill 267 money from the state. And so we're applying for that. That is due November 2nd, and we are doing a lot of coordination with some of the other entities. So just wanted to let you know that. It's an important project, and I know that you all have been very supportive of that. So I apologize for having to leave a little bit early today.
That's fine. So we'll try to get to the important things before you leave. Anything else? All right, thank you. Item number 4, approval of the August 17th minutes of the TAC. Has everybody had a chance to review them?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Item 5, approval of the September 28th, 2017 TAC minutes for the special meeting.
I move approval.
Is there a second? All right, thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Item 6, Board of Directors report from last week's October board meeting.
Well, to follow up Jennifer's comments, the board did approve number 2 to the 2040 plan, which was to add the I-25 gap project in El Paso County to the plan. It also approved a resolution of support for the county's infra grant requests.
All right. All right, thank you for that. Let's move on to item 7. Our first action item is fiscal year 2017 to 2022 TIP Amendment 13. Kevin.
Good afternoon, Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner here with PPACG. Today I'm going to be going over the 2017 and 2022 Amendment number 13. 2017-2022 TIP Amendment Number 13. It comes in two different parts. Both parts are from the Colorado Department of Transportation for two different projects, and they're both maintenance projects. The first project is for State Highway 16 and Sneffels Street intersection improvements. CDOT plans to design and install a new traffic signal, upgrade ADA ramps along with minor curb and gutter work and sidewalk improvements. The second project is I-25 and Rock Rimmon preventative maintenance. The scope of the project includes bridge preventative maintenance and driving surface preventative maintenance. These are the only two projects in the TIP for this month. Any questions on that?
I want to thank you for all the detail in this item. Maps are good. Project description's really good. So thank you. Any questions for Kevin? Could I have a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Second action item, long-range transportation plan infill target. Kevin.
All right. I'm not sure if many of you thought we'd be discussing this item again, but here we are. So if you recall, a few months ago, the TAC made a recommendation for the infill target for the 2045 long-range transportation plan. The TAC recommended that we use the urbanizing area for the 2040 urbanizing area as the boundary to decide if a project classifies as infill or not. The TAC recommended that if a project is inside that area, it's infill, and if it's outside that area, it's not infill. The TAC also recommended that any projects serving military installations would classify as infill as well, even if they're not inside the urbanizing area. We took this to the CAC subsequent to the TAC meeting, and many CAC members were concerned that this using this boundary was not aggressive enough and would not foster higher density development. So we took both of those recommendations. Well, and the CAC actually did not make a recommendation. They just wanted some further direction from the board. So we took TAC's recommendation and CAC's feedback to the board of directors this month and asked for some further direction. And we found that the board was very split amongst themselves as well. So we were not able to get any clear direction on where they wanted to go. But in your memo, I did outline kind of 5 possible avenues that we can take going forward. And since the board meeting, we've had some significant internal staff discussions, and I think we've come up with something that more or less kind of finds that middle ground between the urbanizing area and something more aggressive. I know we talked about using the urbanized area at one point, and we've kind of come to the conclusion that that might be a little bit too aggressive, so we found something that might be kind of between those two boundaries. So I'm going to pull it up here. Yeah, thanks, Ken. Let me see here.
That's good.
Okay. All right. So what we've come up with is more or less this. If you were to imagine all of these colors as one solid border, this is kind of what we've come up with. And let me explain what this is showing. So at the board of directors, they really wanted to emphasize employment centers and population centers. And so what we did internally is we started with how the U.S. Census designates urbanized, and they say an urbanized area has at least 1,000 people per square mile. So we used that kind of as our baseline to establish this border here, and we said basically anything with 1,000 people or above, including population and employment centers, would basically would qualify to be inside of this border. So we're capturing both population centers and employment centers. So you can see out east, for example, Schriever Air Force Base does not have a lot of people living there, but it does have quite a bit of employment. So that is included in this boundary. It's a major employment center. And so if you were to overlay this with the urbanized area, you can see that it's a little bit bigger than the urbanized area. So I'm going to turn that layer on. So that's the urbanizing. I'm sorry. Let me see. Yeah. So the blue here is the urbanized. So there's a few different spots that stick out, but for the most part, the layer that we've come up with is actually less aggressive than the urbanized area. Now, if I overlay it with the urbanizing area, you can see that that's a little bit more. So again, what we found here, we believe as staff, this is kind of the middle ground between using the urbanizing area and the urbanized area, getting at the major employment centers. So we want to kind of get your thoughts on this and see if this is a way where we can kind of meet in the middle and come up with an infill target. Any thoughts? Jennifer?
I just wanted to add, so the urbanized area is a census designation, and it's from 2010. The data that we used here, both the population and employment data, is 2015, so we were able to get that much more current.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point, because all the other baselines we've had, or maybe not all of them, but we're really trying to have a 2015 baseline year. So for most of the other targets, we have 2015 as our baseline year. And so that's kind of what we're doing here as well.
So
The academy.
I can comment to that. This geography that you see in there is based on our TAS's traffic analysis zone. The academy is one zone. And then but it's such a large zone. And this is all based on a per square mile population plus employment per square mile in the TAS. So with the academy being so large, even though it's a major employment, it's an urban cluster based on the census, but the census does it at such a small geography that it shows up. I think there's 5 or 6 census block groups in the academy, which we're combining all into one zone. So that's why it doesn't show up. Peterson shows up. Carson shows up a little bit up in the cantonment area. So we started looking at block groups first, and then we wouldn't have to convert to TASs. But especially on the east side of town, the block groups become so large. Schriever, for instance, is 6 square miles by itself, but it's sitting in a block group that might be 24 square miles. And no matter what you do, the employment, the 300 houses out there at Schriever don't show up in 24 square miles. Not dense enough. So we went with TASs because it's a little bit, well, it's the polygon, the geographies that we've used in the past, and in this case, it certainly helps on the eastern side of town, and downtown, quite a few of the TASs and the block groups are the same geography. But the Air Force Academy is not one, so that's why it dropped out.
So before we start talking about this, I want to make sure that we all understand these new borders here. So the colorful layers with the light blue, that is the 2010 urbanized area.
So the light blue is its own layer. It's underneath everything else, so you can see it kind of sticking out in certain areas. So that's the urbanized area. Now, all these other layers, these different colors, we are proposing this as one specific boundary.
Yeah, okay.
So with the blue layer on, that's 2010?
2010, yep.
So in the map, that's the green area in the little inset map, correct?
Right.
Yep, that's correct.
And when you're saying common ground, you're talking about common ground with the CAC, because last month, the CAC was actually, we had agreed on common ground. So
Exactly, yeah.
it's hard to say that, is this common ground with the CAC, without having CAC input?
And that is hard to say, but the only thing we know at this point from what we've received from the CAC is that they wanted something more aggressive than the urbanizing area. But we understand that using the urbanized area might be too aggressive for some entities, so we're trying to find that middle ground.
Well, I mean, from the city's perspective, and, thanks everyone for entertaining this item on the agenda for, it seems like, the fifth month or so. But, from the city's perspective, we've come to the realization that the approved infill objective, which states increased transportation investments in infill areas with a focus on existing infrastructure, and that the recommended target that the TAC currently has is not very aligned, not consistent, not supportive of what the approved objective is. And from the city's perspective, we would like to see something a little bit more aggressive, knowing that this is not going to be a popular debate again, but we feel it's important, and from the city's side, we would very, very much support something more aggressive, such as the 2010 urbanized area or something like this. Any other thoughts, comments?
So, can you turn the blue off, Kevin?
Yeah.
So if we take this approach, would Highway 94 still come up as a conversation topic, given that it's a connection to Schriever? Because that's what we talked about last time, is not excluding roads that access our military bases. So do we have to put that specific language in there, or would this map cover all of the military base access locations?
I think you would still have to have the wording in the recommendation, like last time that you made it, that it would include roads servicing directly to the military bases or something, because there's nothing in between the airport and Peterson Air Force Base and Schriever. We're not going to do any projects on Schriever. So all we would be doing would be possible projects on Bradley Road, Enoch Road, Curtis Road, 94, serving Schriever. So to include it and to capture what you had in your last recommendation, I think you'd have to add that again.
Was there what we agreed to?
Yes.
What the agreement we had was went to the CAC?
And Kevin, do you know if the CAC had any issues with that language? Or does anybody know if the CAC had any issues with that?
Wasn't there for this discussion.
Okay.
With what? Which language?
The language
tax
you put
recommend-
in about access roads to the military bases, do we know if the CAC had any issues with that, or was it the actual area that their concern was?
I think the conversation was more focused on the overall area.
Okay.
Didn't talk too much about that specific clause, but
Yeah, and I mean, I was there, and I mean, there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of variation in where people were coming from, and many of the CAC members wanted to see a more defined infill area, and thought that it was, well, kind of like I said, not consistent with the language in the objective. That by having a larger infill area, we were kind of watering down what we were trying to do with that.
I was there also. The challenge was they couldn't define what they wanted. They just didn't know they didn't like it. So we asked for advice and recommendations, and
Right.
there really wasn't a lot of help in definitizing what it is they really wanted. So I'm not confident that we send back something else over, not up to, but over to the CAC, that we might have the exact same response next time. I would ask the CAC what it is, try to come up with what it is they're looking for. We tried that also. Then we had a combined CAC workshop, work on defining that area.
Yeah. And That's really good, and I appreciate that, but I think we'd be spinning our wheels if we ask them what they really want. I mean, I think we should be more concerned with, well, I think there's going to be some disagreements just within this committee, and I don't think we should be too concerned with what the CAC's going to do. I think we need to do our work. If it's recommending the same thing or having a couple different alternatives to consider and vote on, I think we should do that and then just let CAC do their work. I think the time for consistent recommendations between all committees is, I think we're beyond that. And
I totally agree with that.
no, I know.
I agree with that.
And the board knows this, I think, and I think they appreciate that, and they're kicking it back to us again to look at. And Jennifer.
I would respectfully agree to disagree with the City of Colorado Springs for a couple of reasons. Just so that you know, I went back and had extensive discussions with our executive director with community development and planning in the county. If you look at all of the county small area plans, so we don't have one big master plan. Over the years, what the county has done, instead of having one large master plan, is that we have individual master plans that are focused within specific areas of the county. Each one of those specific areas within the county, whether it be in the urbanized area or urbanizing areas, also identify that, and also outside of those areas, have opportunities and needs for infill, whether they're in that area or not. And so I look at the boundary, and especially the urbanizing boundary, which I thought was at last time a good compromise between some of the municipality staffs and the county staff, and I wasn't happy with that, but I thought it was at least reasonable. And as I look at some of those areas, especially in the urbanizing area, there are areas that both the City of Colorado Springs and the City of Fountain are now annexing today to be able to develop. So if that's not infill because you're annexing, I have no idea what it is. So I just really have a problem in looking at that map and saying there's areas along Powers, there's areas along 94, and we are currently doing a PEL study that is wrapping up on Highway 24 that is making sure that we do improvements along those corridors to accommodate the growth. So I truly, I don't have the right answer, but I really thought that we had come to a reasonable answer the last time that we had, a meeting and made a recommendation as the TAC. So I cannot agree in regards to not including the urbanizing boundary.
The reason I suggested putting this back on the agenda as an action item is the TAC has made a recommendation 2 months ago. The board had a discussion, and they did a thumbs up, thumbs down, informal vote on TAC's recommendation. They're using the urbanizing area, and they had an extensive discussion prior to that, where city and county staff presented their views and recommended employment be considered. Board members did the same, and they were all over the place, just like we've been all over the place, and CAC has been all over the place. And so one option is that you don't change your recommendation, and you make no motion today, and you stand by what you recommended 2 months ago. But based on what the board has said, and we tried to bring something that incorporated what was presented to the board and said by the board at their meeting last week, that this includes employment, whereas in the past we'd only been talking about population. Now, if that's not enough to sway you, and then you stand by your existing recommendation.
Tim.
Can you go back to staff's recommendation? See?
Oh, taking off the urbanizing?
Yeah. And then don't you have a blue layer underneath?
That's off.
That isn't the blue layer staff
Our recommendation is this layer. Yep. The blue layer is the urbanized area.
You could zoom out a little bit and show Woodland Park and Palmer Lake are included in that.
So, from what seems to me like this is probably what the CAC was recommending, or more support of that, or were they even wanting more, a tighter footprint than this?
So we haven't shown the CAC this. We just developed this this week, but we developed this based on some of the feedback we received from the board. Several board members mentioned that they were interested in identifying areas with population centers and employment centers. So this kind of gets at that, but it's based off of how the census determines what is urban. So that's that was the starting point.
I think it's clear that the CAC and the board are telling us that I'm okay with the tighter footprint. I think that I would like to talk about having and access to Schriever. Maybe it's the tighter footprint plus all the state highways. Because, I mean, you look at Woodland Park and there's a gap there. So, maybe we look at, and I don't know how much this will filter into when CDOT's proposing projects. I don't think you have to follow any of our criteria.
Actually, with the way the FAST Act reads, we do. So, because if we do projects that don't aid to the scoring and the implementation issues that have to happen under the FAST Act, then it doesn't help. It's inside the MPO area, so we do have to follow. And I'm trying to educate all those engineers on what that means.
Well, it just seems to me like 24 to Woodland Park and I-25 to Monument, and even to Palmer Park, the highways should be, we shouldn't just be focusing on 94. I like the tighter footprint, but also like the regional connections to each entity's tighter footprint, if you will.
So that's actually one thing that we talked about internally was, so there's the option of when you're looking at projects and scoring and things like that, looking at the actual polygons, whether we considered the individual colors or just pretended that they were all one. And so with the Schriever example is a good one because we talked about, well, would we do something like a flagpole, where you do include the roadway leading to kind of the outlying blob, whatever that may be, if it's Schriever or Woodland Park. So that's something staff talked about, and we were hoping would come up today because that's certainly an option to include wording. It's not just military installations. There are other examples that sort of fit that as well.
And I would add, Tim, that there are significant county roads that provide access to those military installations, and there are arterials, some of them that have been funded through federal highway dollars already and DAR money. So, I mean, to exclude some of those things because it's not a state highway, it's not okay. And if you look at the census data is from 2010. That's 10 years ago almost at this point. And the city, both cities are annexing areas in that urbanizing area, significant areas with significant traffic impacts that not only impact county roads, but also state roads and also city roads. So I have a difficult time, when we're looking at infill, we don't have a growth boundary in this county between the cities and the counties. If we had a growth boundary, maybe that would be more appropriate and easier to address. But as the city is annexing those areas and the urbanizing areas, I have a hard time understanding why those areas are not going to be included. Those areas today may be unincorporated, but we have 2 or 3 annexations going on in those areas today as we speak.
I hear you, and when you look at what we agreed to last month versus this, and you look at the square miles lost, I think the city loses the most. Because when you look at the footprint and what the shaded area is.
You're annexing those areas today, Tim. those applications are in process.
But if we're okay, so if we're annexing the areas and we're taking.
You're
them off
annexing the areas and you're not taking the roads. So the county is left with roads to improve and maintain.
I think we're annexing.
You're annexing a portion of Constitution, you're not annexing all of it. You're doing what I would call hopscotch, so you're leaving the roads. In Monument, we have that same thing. We have those roads, they're annexing around it. In the city of Fountain, not so much, they're doing a better job, but, I mean, we have roads that, and areas that are being developed around in those urbanizing areas, not only in the city of Colorado Springs, but in the town of Monument, and all over the place.
I would still argue that we're losing the most out of the footprint. And if we're
No,
okay
because because the city is not requiring improvements on those county roads. I'm dealing with that today.
I just,
So, I mean, I respectfully disagree. I know, and I understand, but when we have approved master plan elements to our county master plan, which has been adopted through the Board of County Commissioners, that show infill areas, and there are even infill areas outside of the urbanized area, I really have a hard time trying to compromise here, and I thought we got to a good compromise, so.
So a couple comments. I just want to point out, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but the woodland parks, the Green Mountain Falls, the Manitous, the Palmer Lake, the Monument Fountain, those would be included in this new boundary, correct?
Yes, so you can see kind of Woodland Park is in there.
Yep.
Green Mountain Falls is in there. Manitou Springs is in there. Go up to Monument area,
Right.
Palmer Lake.
Okay.
So not all of Incorporated Monument is in there, not all of Green Mountain Falls Incorporation is in there. So I'm not sure that that's really a true statement.
Yeah, I think each entity might lose a little bit, but I think
And the other point, and this is something we're not getting into today, but we will in the coming months. We're going to be looking at evaluation criteria and scoring. So I just want to kind of keep it in perspective. If we end up with an evaluation criteria for infill, it's very likely that scoring could look something like, you have a project in an infill area, a designated infill area, you get full points, 10 points, say. If it's in the urbanizing area, the 2040 urbanizing area, the pink layer, something larger than that, you would get maybe 5, 6, 7 points. And if you're outside of that, you could get no points. So I'm not saying that's the way it's going to look like, but it could very well be the way we come up with scoring for this item. So when it really comes down to it, we're looking at, a project getting 4 or 5 points less in its scoring. It's not a huge deal. Some of these projects you might gain, and some of the evaluation criteria you might lose. So it's always been a balancing act with this process, and it's a challenge every 4 years that we do it, but it is the process, and you win some and you lose some, but we're really talking about just a few points difference.
I agree with you there. I'd also note, as I look at this, your Colorado Springs Airport is not included in your urbanized area, and we actually have a CAS zone that is there to support, that urbanizing area and making sure that we're supporting development in that area. So, I mean, I don't see why we're stuck on this map. And looking at that other map, Tim, a lot of that area is the airport, which, through PPRTA, El Paso County, and the city of Colorado Springs, we have incentives for them to develop in there.
Right, but we've had an infill task force, and the airport doesn't fall within that priority of the infill development.
Okay, that's good to know. That's interesting. Has your infill task force completed all of the work and made the recommendations
So, part of the comprehensive plan.
adopted through the city of Colorado Springs?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. It's
Okay.
been in place for some time, and as Tim said, it's been incorporated into the comprehensive plan.
Okay, well,
That's a challenge, isn't it? So we have a board of county commissioners that's approved area development plans, city council that's approved infill plans. We got, and neither of us can go home. Which is why when we were where we worked the last time, that's where we got to that compromise. That's how we achieved that. That's something we could both go home with. My understanding. Right? I mean, if I'm lying, or if I'm mistaken, please correct me.
Well, that was.
So that's that. We can go back and revisit history, and I appreciate the thought process that we both have to put into this. We were where we were for a reason. In fact, I remember distinctly. You and I sat right here having that conversation.
We did.
So that's why we're struggling.
I guess we're struggling too because the board and the CAC haven't really adopted it.
And they didn't give good guidance. They didn't give guidance.
well,
The guy said
yeah,
they weren't
I
happy,
mean,
and the board said, here's some other things we want you to consider. And we've considered them then, and we're looking at them now, but we're still going, I feel we can go back to the same.
I will say the board had more or less an informal vote, doing thumbs up, thumbs down, voting between using the urbanizing area and the urbanized, and it was half and half. So that was kind of one of the reasons we came up with this, is this kind of the middle ground. So
Yeah, and, I like the collaboration that we all have, and it's really nice to have full-on unanimous recommendations, but, and I'm, whatever way this goes, I'm okay with, but us as staff needed to bring this up, and we want it considered, and the board has, there's 5 alternatives on Kevin's memo here that came out of the board meeting, and this is an additional option to consider, and it is worth considering, but, that's, whatever way this goes, we'll continue to work together and move forward, but it's something that we needed to bring up, so.
and I agree, and I appreciate the city's position, and I think at this point I have a different position.
Right.
So,
I understand, totally.
so I will all continue to work together and,
Right,
so.
right. Okay. Is there anybody who would like to make a motion to start with?
I would make a motion that we keep it the way it was presented to the board the last time.
I would second that.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, raise hands. And opposed? Okay.
Should we explain our opposition to kind of help clarify to the CAC or the board?
sure,
I
I'll
think
write it.
that's
I think
appropriate.
dissenting opinion is always important this year.
Okay,
Yes.
I think that, I think the CAC and the board, even though it's half the board, I think that there obviously is a support from our previous compromise, if you will. And I think this is still, staff's recommendation is still somewhat of a compromise, especially if we were to include the connections out to, the outlying areas identified by staff. I think that would still accomplish the same, tighter, and I still feel that the city is losing the most area of infill, area to expend monies for infill, and I think that we would support something like this. And the compromise would be, we would still get access to the other outlying areas. So I think that there's a new compromise out there that will accomplish the goal of the long-range plan, but also the goal of everybody around this table.
And PPACG staff, if, not that I'm asking for a novel, but can you make sure that some of this discussion is, from all sides, is captured in the minutes? Okay, thank you.
Are your microphones on?
Yes.
Because we're going to have to go back and
I don't know if my light's on or off, so
it turns bright blue if it's on.
it's not going
No,
either
it
way.
doesn't do anything.
Then what you just said has not been recorded.
I wrote it down.
Bethany, you got it? Kevin, all right. All right, thank you,
Please,
everyone.
please make sure that your blue, the blue light is on, and it's a bright blue when it's on, because the microphones just don't, recordings don't pick up what's said if the microphone's on.
Okay.
All right,
This is not turning on either way, so.
thank you, everyone. Mr. Moore.
Jim Moore, Chair of the CAC. First, a disclaimer. I missed the meeting where this discussion took place in the CAC, so I can't really speak to the essence of what went on, and I look forward to our discussion next week when we will be doing just what you just did. If the spirit is not fully captured in terms of the minutes that you all see, which I would like to ask Bethany to provide me a copy of, just for information. I want to make sure, I've been sitting and listening, and I will try to convey a true account of what your discussion has been. The important thing that I'm hearing is that there seems to be a significant departure in understanding what infill means by entity. So Jennifer, I would really appreciate it if you could make sure that the county reps to the CAC are up to speed on what the county position is. I don't think we have a whole lot of trouble in understanding the city side of things, but the county and what some of the implications are for that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, but remember, I'm kind of stupid too. Okay,
Hardly.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks again, everyone. Let's move on to our information items with 8A, Transportation Planning Toolkit. Welcome, Tim.
All right, gang. Thanks for having me. Again, for those of you that don't know me, I might be a new face to you. My name is Tim Kirby. I manage the MPO and Regional Planning section at CETA. And I got to tell you, I'm not here for comic relief, but the last conversation reminds me of the old joke of the optimist and the pessimist walking down the street together. The pessimist says, things cannot get any worse. And the optimist says, of course they can. Right? So what I would say is encourage you guys. It's an excellent conversation. I go to TAC meetings like this all over the state, and I can say that, anytime you can respectfully disagree and have productive conversation, it's a really powerful, it really shows the cohesiveness of the group. So it's impressive to see you guys working that way. So my presence here today with you guys is to give you a presentation on the Transportation Planning Toolkit. I've really broken this presentation down into two distinct parts. One is the background on the Transportation Planning Toolkit. We developed the toolkit as part of what we were hearing from our TPRs, but we soon found that it may have applicability to the MPO. So I'm going to take you through the background, explain to you what it is, and then I'll do a full stop, let you tell me if what I'm saying makes sense and would be beneficial to you guys. If it is, we can walk you through kind of module one. You guys are aware, you dig into some pretty meaty topics, fairly sophisticated. And so what I don't want to do is give you information that seems, maybe a little bit below your level and waste anybody's time. So with that, let's get kicked off. I'll see if I can get this to work. Okay, so for the first part of the agenda, I'm going to take you guys through 5 things. We're going to talk about the statewide plans, lesson learned. Now, this was an activity that was launched after the last 2040 statewide plan was completed, and we learned a lot of valuable lessons. After that, I'm going to give you an overview of the Transportation Planning Toolkit. We'll take you through some of the core and elective modules, and then we'll jump kind of into the schedule. So I'm going to rewind the clock and go back to the development of the 2040 Colorado statewide transportation plan. After we completed that plan, we went out to you all, our TPRs, our MPOs, and what we said is, what could we do better? We always want to improve our process. So we heard three distinct things across the state, and they were pretty much unanimous. One is that TPRs and MPOs want to be engaged earlier in the process when it comes to statewide and regional transportation plan development. Now, you all are different from transportation planning regions in the sense that you have full autonomy over the development of your regional transportation plans, whereas in the TPRs we tend to shape and craft that vision in a partnership. Number two, folks wanted the opportunity to increase collaboration and input on technical areas of the plan. And finally, that third bullet is kind of the key bullet, and it's why I'm here before you guys today. Is what we heard is that folks wanted additional educational outreach that could be tailored to the needs of the various planning groups, right? So what they were saying is, as we get into our regional transportation development and statewide plan development cycles, we don't always have the educational resources we need to make informed, effective, and efficient decision making. So we took that to heart. And we took it back to our lab. We thought about it for a while, and what we came up with was the Transportation Planning Toolkit. So what is the Transportation Planning Toolkit? It's a series of targeted informational topics surrounding key elements of the planning process, which really opens the book on CDOT's essential business practices. The goal of the toolkit is to take you all, members of TPRs and MPOs, through kind of this linear process of, hey, I've got an idea or a transportation need. What are the steps I need to take to get it all the way through the planning cycle to get it to construction? Our goal is that by presenting this information statewide to all the TPRs and across the state, is that we'll raise that baseline of information that will overall enrich our next round or our next plan development cycle. The way that we've broken the toolkit up is into core and elective topics. So we have 5 core elements. They're the idea phase, planning, funding, project selection, and improvement implementation. The reason we split it up into 2 core and electives is that one of the things we heard across the state was there was a strong need for MPOs and TPRs to reflect their individuality or their uniqueness or their interest areas within their plan. So we didn't want to be so prescriptive to say is that here's the information that we're going to give to you guys and that's all you get. What we wanted to say was here's 5 core items that everyone in the state should have probably consensus and think along the same lines on, and then here's this whole host of other elective topics that you guys can delve in individually that more reflect your interest areas. Probably most important about this effort is all the materials that we're developing, all the information that we plan to share will be housed on a website, right? And so later on in the presentation, I'll give you kind of a sneak peek of what that presentation looked like. But really think about a repository of information. So if you got a new local elected or hired a new member of staff, they could go to this website, download the presentation that I'm going to give you guys today. They could download fact sheets or they could watch videos. Kind of a one-stop shop for planning. If you had to go to a council meeting or a board meeting and you needed a quick one-hitter on what is CDOT asset management, you could print that off and take it to that meeting with you. Really intended to be a resource for everyone in the state. So we're not duplicating efforts, but again, CDOT's continuing to add value to you all in your daily lives. So we are not glib. We are well aware that folks' participation on boards like these, as well as the TPRs, is that they're interested in the needs of their local areas and taking their transportation ideas or needs and getting construction projects built from them. And so the way we tailored this whole outfit was really to say, okay, you've got an idea or a need. Here's the process to take you through to bring that to fruition. We did this because that's what folks told us to do. And so, really, I think, we do a lot of listening, right? So after we did the statewide plan, lessons learned, about a year later, we went out and did another listening session called Together We Go. And as part of Together We Go, we heard a couple of really important things. One was, we want to understand how ideas turn into constructed projects. The other one is we want to understand, how key pieces of data help us make decisions. And so from that really informed the basis and the genesis and the creation of the Transportation Planning Toolkit. So what are the benefits? One of the primary benefits we see is really it's going to create a baseline of understanding across the entire state. What we see now is based on staff turnover or folks' ability to plug in. There's very varied levels of understanding of the planning process, and that can lead to competitive advantages for certain folks that are more aware of how that process works. We want to raise all boats, get everyone to the same level so they can all, effectively advocate for their local areas. Another primary benefit is that, this is really going to tailor, these educational topics towards the needs of individual areas. If you have, a small town in northwest Colorado that's really looking to revitalize Main Street, this can serve as a base of information of how they can execute that ultimate goal. Again, it provides on-demand access to a variety of information that you guys can access as you need it. And overall, it allows for efficient and informed decision-making. That's really what we're looking for, is everybody having the ability and the information they need to effectively advocate for their local areas. So on the screen here, what you see are kind of these 5 core modules. I've already explained to you what those are, so I won't go into great detail. Every one of those sub-bullets that you see below there, and I'll make sure that we get this out to Bethany so she can share with the group. But all of those that you see there, all those sub-bullets, those are fact sheets that you can anticipate being on the website. So it's like, okay, great planning. You're going to get, if you guys want, you'll get a, oh, did I take us back? I think this thing got a life of its own. Maybe I'm just speaking too loudly. There you go. Okay. The presentations that we give in person are meant to give you kind of that 30,000-foot level. And if you see something or hear something that piques your interest, you'll have the resources to go investigate that. If we were to give you kind of a soup to nuts, really detailed and in-depth presentation on planning, we could spend hours having that conversation. We know that you all are very busy, and we don't want to take up more than about 15-minute chunks from you to deliver information. But what we do want to do is build the wherewithal to where you could go onto our website and dig into that information that you find most valuable. So those are kind of the core, and then these are the elective modules. So, and then again, this was us trying to kind of cast that wide net of what are those kind of outside areas that folks may have interest in that would identify or highlight their uniqueness. We identified technology, the environment, economic vitality, transit, freight, planning tools, and then bicycle and pedestrian. The way we envision this working is you all are a little bit different because you meet on a monthly basis. Our TPRs, most of them meet on a quarterly schedule, so they meet about 4 times a year. So for the TPRs, they'll probably only get to delve into 2 of these, and then we'll do statewide webinars for the others. Whereas for you all, if this is something you're interested in, we could give you detailed information on all of these topics if you so chose. Oops, give me the wrong one. So I'm going to stop there and just look to this group and say, I have a presentation that we can jump into project ideas. I can walk you through that briefly, and then you can ask questions. If it feels like kind of that 30,000-foot level, you already have a good handle on that. This isn't something we really need to delve into. Completely understand that. I want to adhere to the audience, and just you knowing that this information out there is good enough for us. So I'll really look to you guys. Do you want to hear, kind of the other half of this presentation that delves into project ideas, or are we good doing a full stop and ending the presentation there?
Head nods. Yes. Keep going.
Proceed?
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So what we're going to delve into right now is kind of module 1, or kind of this project ideas, right? Because all of these ideas are floating around, and it's good for us to understand where those ideas come from, both from a public setting, but also from an institutional setting, and then we'll have a conversation about data. So real quick on the screen, so this is, we're working through the bureaucracy of state government, and we're in the process of building this website, something that I wouldn't imagine to be too difficult, but apparently it's more difficult than what it comes off as. But this is to give you guys just a general idea of what our website looks like. So each one of those 5 icons correlates directly to one of the 5 core modules, whether it's idea, planning, funding, project selection, or improvement. When you're to go onto our website, you simply select one of those icons, and again, you'll have the ability to download this presentation that I'm going to give you today in PowerPoint form. You guys take complete ownership over it, so you could download it, manipulate it, make it work to whatever audience you're giving it to. Then there will also be fact sheets and videos. So that is to come. It's not up to date, but just I wanted to give you guys an idea that what this resource will look like and where you can find it. So when we're talking about project ideas and the source of project ideas, there's really three primary areas where we CDOT look for these project ideas coming from: public input, our asset management systems, and then data analysis. So let's delve into each one of those on an individual level with a little bit more detail. So public input. At CDOT, and what I've observed of the TPR and the MPOs, public input isn't just lip service. It isn't something that just sounds nice, makes it sound inclusionary. It's something that we take very, very seriously. When we hear things from the public, we always respond to them. So where do they come from in terms of, from the grassroots approach? Because again, I remind everyone that in Colorado, we have a mandated grassroots approach to transportation planning. We have to work together across the spectrum of governments. So they come from venues like this, TPR and MPO meetings. We get them from elected officials. We do our level best to reach out to businesses and industry groups to get their opinions, special interest organizations. Andy Katz from COPERG talked to our Transportation Commission this morning, and interfacing with different CDOT staff. And then lastly, we live in a digital age, so we also get feedback electronically. The most important thing that I can convey on the public input side is that we do not operate in a vacuum, and we have to work together as governments, and we need your help in identifying projects. You're blessed to have Wendy Pettit, who comes and works with you guys on a regular basis, and that type of cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation, and the sharing of ideas really allows the enterprise to do its business effectively. So I put this slide up because I think it's a really interesting one. So for the first time as part of the 2040 development plan cycle, we did something called telephone town halls, and it happened right here in Colorado Springs. So what a telephone town hall is basically we pay a private sector company to make a massive phone call to all the residents in a geographic area, and then we discuss transportation topics with them. Who here has ever been to a public meeting where you had about 4 people in front of you? I know I've definitely been there, right? The amazing thing about a telephone town hall, that picture on the upper right-hand side is about the audience that we maintain for the course of an hour. The difference from 4 people, the difference is thousands, right? So the magnitude, the reach of how we can get to those folks is immense. The point that I'm trying to make with this slide is that the availability of new technology, new strategies around public input is allowing us to reach more people more effectively than we ever have in the past before. So it's just, I put a plug in there for telephone town halls because we just really feel it's a really effective way to get out there with folks. And when we do start the development, the next round of plan development, we will, in earnest, we will look to kind of re-energize that relationship and have those conversations again. Whoops. Okay, so that's public input. That's kind of one leg of the tripod. The second leg is CDOT's asset management. So just a quick reminder, what does CDOT do? What do we maintain and operate? It's about 23,000 lane miles. It's about 3,300 vehicles, 1,200 buildings, 3,500 bridges, 1,500 geohazard sites, 6,000 culverts, 21 tunnels, and about 2,300 ITS devices. We have a large enterprise, large portfolio of assets that we oversee at any one time. In the days when we had money, that was great. We could do it, efficiently and effectively. But with lean times comes the need to use data and make the most educated decisions we can make in terms of making the right infrastructure investments in the system. Same thing holds true with transit, right? So transit, it's not highway infrastructure, but it's more. There are still capital and operating expenses that have to be maintained, looking at the useful life of transit vehicles. But let's talk a little bit about asset management. So CDOT's asset management really applies a risk-based approach, to making sure that we are applying those extremely limited funds to the right projects at the right time. I put this graphic on the screen because I think it's especially helpful to show you guys, really the process we go through. So we go out and we inspect and assess the current conditions of our assets. We data collect, right? From there, once we understand what our assets look like, we establish goals and set objectives. Where are they and where do we want them to be?
Tim, can I ask you a quick question? How often do you do that?
How often do we do that?
Do you make it through all of your
All the assets. Well, it's the goal of William Johnson. I don't want to speak out of place and put him on the spot, but they try to do it about annually, right? Obviously, we have a ton of assets that we have to work through. CDOT, within our structure, we have a set of regional asset managers that are responsible for their asset portfolio. So every year when we sit down through the budget setting process to say what dollars should go to what assets, we try to bring forth the asset conditions to the best of our ability. So it's about on an annual basis.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So once we've identified risks and opportunities, we develop mitigation strategies and investment strategies. So if certain category, if we've invested a certain amount of money in a certain type of an asset, we may want to divert new resources to those struggling assets. So it's not something that is just set and constant, set in stone. We're constantly reanalyzing what the conditions of our assets are and what our strategies are to get them up to our performance measures. And then once we've done that, we prioritize, we design, and we construct. And then that cycle begins in earnest per start of the next annual. So there has been a recent sea change in CDOT recently in terms of how we look at and how we approach our highway assets. So what I've done is I put a graphic on the screen for you. On the left-hand side is kind of our old way that we used to look at how we approach highways, right? It was called remaining service life. We have since transitioned to something called drivability life. It's important to understand the old to see why we went to the new. So under the old method, we prioritize project based on age, right? So prioritized roads received a full rebuild. So that meant that other roads that weren't getting a full rebuild waited years because those full rebuilds are extraordinarily expensive. So what did that mean? Overall, holistically, it meant fewer lane miles were treated per year. So knowing that our resources were limited, that the system was starting to decay, we moved to a new system called drivability life. Drivability life based prioritization on the driver's real-world experience. How does that road actually feel when you drive it? Roads are prioritized roads receive more minor treatments, which extend the useful life of that asset. But it also means that those more frequent treatments can meet more or can see more lane miles each year. So basically what we're saying is we used to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We've cut it down to just peanut butter and we spread the peanut butter a little bit further, knowing that there's a tremendous need across the enterprise and the assets. So really, again, it's extending the useful life of a particular highway asset through more frequent minor treatments. And that's not to say that we don't do full rebuilds. I don't want to give you guys that impression. There are instances where that needs to be done. But the philosophy is, if we can get to a road before it's fully degraded, give it a minor treatment, extend the useful life, we'll make our dollars, stretch our dollars a little bit further. So that's asset management. That's the second leg. Now let's talk about the third leg, which is really data analysis, which is the new frontier for us in terms of how we go about identifying projects. So what I've put on the screen for you here is kind of our cycle of data analysis. So how do what's our kind of data ring? Well, we start and we collect performance data. Once we've done our data collection, we can go and we can analyze it. That helps us to identify a pattern, right? Those patterns could exist along safety lines, congestion, whatever it may be. Once we have a known pattern, we can identify a potential improvement and deploy strategies to that particular project need or project area. So really it's allowing, it's not just one thing to have data, it's to turn that data into actionable intelligence, put that into a program for improvement, and that's exactly what the department's doing. Jump ahead one more here. So big data analysis. So this is an interesting concept. Just by a show of hands, who here has heard of big data? At this point, it's kind of a known concept, kind of not. I'm a country boy from Alaska, so when I hear things like big data, they don't always register for me. So let me give you my best layman explanation of big data. So right now, with all of our gizmos and gadgets, we are creating what a lot of people call digital exhaust. So information that it flows from us, whether it's from our computers, our cell phones, our vehicles, it's everywhere. Well, there are a number of private sector firms that are capturing that data. And when they capture that data, we can turn that data into intelligence. A great example is the FedEx model, right? So there was some smart engineer at FedEx that sat down and he was getting new streams of data, and what he found out is that if they instructed or if they created travel patterns to where their drivers just took right-hand turns, they could limit the amount of time they spend at traffic lights and save millions of dollars across the enterprise, right? So these are the types of inferences that big data can allow us to make. And the point is that the amount of data we're getting is growing exponentially, and it's just going to continue to grow larger and larger and larger as we get more technologically advanced devices. And the point is that we can capture that data, turn it into intelligence, and it'll help us make the best investment decisions that we can possibly make. Or at least that's kind of the idea, the theoretical idea. We're still learning about big data, though, right? There's a lot. There's a lot that's still left to be learned. We were at a conference, and one of my big things is, and I'll only go on the soapbox for a minute. It's not that cool, and I'm not that cool of a person, so I don't mind talking about it. It's demography, right? So demographers and their predictive abilities have always been limited to the extent of their data sets, right? And they're about to get the biggest data set in the history of the world, so they can be really predictive in where people are going to go and where they're going to want to live and how they're going to react to certain things. The speaker at this particular conference is a guy named Kenneth Gronbeck. You should Google him because his website is hilarious. Terminator 2 meets demography, and it's hilarious. But the guy's really brilliant, right? He said when he was a young engineer, he made his fortune because he had, saved up, a good amount of money, and it was in the late 1970s, and he invested it all in diapers because he saw this huge millennial generation about to be born, and he made a ton of money off it. So after the conference, I asked him, I was like, well, what do you invest in now? And he's like, oh, well, I sold all that. He's like, I invest in rockstone granite quarries. It's like, what, you invested in rocks? He's like, well, yeah, baby boomers and tombstones. They're going to need a lot of them, and I'm going to own the rights to a bunch of them. You know what I mean? And so it's like, as governments, big data does something, it allows us to be proactive. And the difference between proactive and reactive government is really substantial, right? I can give you two examples, FEMA and NASA. You probably have two fundamental different reactions to both of those agencies because NASA is proactive, and FEMA has historically been reactive to the nature of emergency management. And so really what big data allows us to do is to be proactive in our investment decision making. So I talked way too long on that particular topic, but if you get me going on demography, I can talk forever. So I will shut up now. So that, in a nutshell, is module number 1. The high level overview. Again, if there's anything that I said to you today that piqued your interest, know that we have a number of fact sheets coming that are going to every one of the topics that we talked about today. The next module in this kind of journey is planning. It's up next, and so we have that presentation developed. Happy to come back and deliver that to you guys at the request of this body. So with that, I'll say thank you and answer any questions if you have them.
Thanks, Tim. Are there any questions now, or if anything comes up, we'll direct them your way?
Great. Thanks for the time, guys.
This vehicle miles traveled slide, do you actually have it, or do we just have it?
Of vehicle miles traveled?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, this one?
Yes.
So I use this one as a good example, right? So, this is a fairly, I skip over it because, really, there's a lot of inferences that could be made, right? But, basically what this is saying is what's the obvious correlation, right? Is the increase in VMT should have a causal relationship with fatalities, right? So look at in the fairly constant years in the early 1980s. And the reason that correlation should exist, right, because the opportunity exists. If you have more people on the road driving more miles, you should see a natural correlation. But what this graph says to me and speaks to me is that the number of fatalities hasn't just stayed constant; it's declined over those years with exponential growth in VMT travel. Why is that? Well, it's because we made a pretty hefty investment in safety. And you can see the safety returns on that, right? So what would be a logical correlation is uprooted and upended because we've made marketable improvements through investment strategy. And so this is just a good graphic that shows you that through data we can make investments that really do improve the lives of people on one of the most important elements, which is safety. Sorry, I kind of breezed over that. It put some people to sleep, and it's dark in here. I didn't want everyone to take an early nap. So, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Could I have the lights, please? Thank you. Just so I make sure everybody's awake while I present this. what we're looking to do, we're developing our 2018 Transit Service Improvement Plan. Obviously, for next year, we're trying to get some initial feedback by going to all the boards and committees, all of our stakeholders, trying to get some feedback that could help us finalize our proposal that will go out later in December for service improvements in 2018. And the purpose of this, you know, we have $1.4 million in additional or excess RTA revenues. There were 2 budget amendments this year. So we have a substantial amount of money to put into operations. And, you know, the mayor just released his budget a couple weeks ago, and there's about $180,000 increase in the city general fund for transit, which is great. That gets us up a little bit higher than that RTA maintenance of level effort. With that $180,000, we're planning to, you know, absorb some of the contract costs with the escalation costs for the contracts for our fixed route paratransit and maintenance contracts. And also, we're looking to hire a mobility manager, which used to be housed within PPACG. Now that we have the joint call center on our property, we're looking to hire a mobility manager to oversee the operations of the call center. And part of that $180,000 will cover the 20% match for that position. But that leaves us with $1.4 million to put out on the road. And what we're looking to do is continue improving the overall productivity and performance of our system. We're looking on improving our customers' experience and trying to attract new riders by enhancing service levels and improving our service within our existing service area. Our 2040 transit plan, which is a little over 2 years old now, said let's focus on improving our existing system before we expand. But if there are opportunities to expand, such as with the Northern Hospitals and Pikes Peak Community College's Rampart campus up north, that we look to partner with them to help us subsidize those services. So the alternatives that are listed in this in the table at the bottom of this memo, this is what we developed. The version that I have has a red line, and everything above that red line could realistically be funded. And that red line pretty much went all the way to the bottom underneath Route 19. If you see Route 27 at the top and Route 1 at the bottom, we're proposing to increase frequency on either or one of those routes. And as part of this feedback process, we're trying to get direction on which way to go with that. You know, currently we have 15-minute service on North Nevada from the Citadel Mall up to the Voyager Parkway Transfer Center. You know, Transit would like to see the establishment of the entire corridor as 15-minute service, but we know that Route 1 has a very high ridership, and it takes more of a circuitous route from the downtown terminal to Academy and Hancock. So that's a very good candidate for 15-minute service as well. A lot of these other options are increasing Saturday frequency to 30 minutes on Route 3 that goes out to Manitou Springs, and on Route 1. These are routes that still have high ridership on the weekends, and everything that operates on the weekends and weekday evenings operates at 60-minute headways. I wish Anton and Jennifer were here, but we're looking to add Saturday service on Route 32, which goes down to the Security Widefield area into unincorporated El Paso County. That's more of it's kind of a community resource. There are a lot of people who need to use the service on the weekends, and we think that that's a good fit to add service there. There's 3 new services being proposed. a new route on Union Boulevard from Boulder Street up to Academy Boulevard. And what I should have done is to bring a map here, but Route 5 is our east-west route that goes from the downtown terminal to the Citadel. That has 15-minute service. Route 25 on North Academy now has 15-minute service, so we're looking to tie in another north-south route in between the Nevada corridor and the Academy corridor for people to get through the region a little bit better. And then we're proposing to add a limited type, express type service from Union Academy up to the northern hospitals. So Memorial Hospital and the new Children's Hospital that's being built, we're proposing to add an express type service. And if we can get partnerships with Memorial and Children's, perhaps any additional money that they bring to the table could be put into a better type of service, better level service. And likewise, we're continuing to negotiate with Pikes Peak Community College to provide service to the Rampart campus. So again, we think, and this is part of the College Pass program, we've been working with PPCC, CC, and UCCS to have a some type of student fare. Currently, we have one with CC and UCCS. It's like, I'm losing my voice, sorry. It's a $5 per student per semester fee that CC has. And that helps other students ride for free. And UCCS committed to funding that this year as a trial period. And they're going to have a student vote next year to let the students determine whether they want their student fees increased. So PPCC said they'd like to take part, but they want service to the Rampart campus. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. So they said, you know, the rest of their campuses down south, obviously we have a transfer center there. The downtown campus has service, but the Rampart campus isn't served. So we're hopeful that some kind of agreement could be made there. And again, we could possibly do an express type service from the Voyager Parkway Transfer Center up to the Rampart campus. And so, you know, we pretty much could get through this list entirely, with the exception of we need a either or on Route 27 or Route 1 for 15-minute service. And kind of informing this entire process was a system-wide assessment that we did earlier this summer, using our service standards, looking at ridership levels, ridership per hour, on-time performance. That really helped inform this entire process and help us come up with data-driven and reinforceable alternatives that actually make sense and are done smartly. So we have the data to back it up. I would say that it's big data. But it really helped to inform this process. And we have so much data we collect from our fare boxes, and we have a lot of really good tools to use this, and it's nice to actually apply it. So if you don't have any comments today, please feel free over the next couple of weeks to look at this more closely. If you have any suggestions or opinions about which way to go here, please let me know. So, any questions?
I've got one. Brian, when you talk about transit level of service, increasing headway, increasing evening, adding evening service, weekend service, would each one of those be a separate level of service, or is there a standard terminology or gradation of level of service in transit world?
Well, yes, it's a lot of that. I mean, the level of service is, you know, it could be applied to headways, how often a bus comes by your bus stop. Is it every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes? But also, how many routes do we operate on the weekday evenings and Saturday and Sunday? I mean, we have we have limited service on weekday. I was okay until you asked that question.
I guess what I'm kind of getting at, on the roadside, we talk about
Right.
level of service A, B, C, D,
Yeah.
and F, and it's kind of a measure of congestion. But, it's a standard terminology, and I didn't know within the transit world, do you have a transit level of service A, B, C, or anything like that?
It's not identical, but by using our service standards, we can kind of come up with a mean of where all of our routes are performing. Routes that are a standard deviation or two above the mean would be candidates for increased frequency, or if they're really strong performers during weekdays, maybe having, and they don't have Saturday or Sunday service, maybe they would be good candidates for Saturday or Sunday service. So it's not identical to the roadway level of service,
Okay.
but we do work somewhat that way. All right. Brandy.
If you need to, you can just nod. About sustainability, you have this funding for 18. Do you have it for 19, 20, 21? Is this something that's going to stay in your
No.
budget, or is it one-time?
Great question. With everything that we've reinstated after the Great Recession, all the service that we've added, including this, we look at our reserves, we look at expected revenues and what our expected funding is, and before we put anything out, we make sure that we can sustain that for at least 5 years. Because, that's the last thing we want to do is put service out and then have the economy tank the next year and have to pull all that service back. So, that's a great question. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Yeah, and if you have any comments, please feel free to send them my way. Item 8C, 2017 to 2022 TIP flexible funding policy cost overruns. Kevin.
Good afternoon, Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner. So this is that time of the quarter when we are announcing that if project sponsors are experiencing cost overruns in the current fiscal year of the TIP, they can send us a letter and fill out the questionnaire that we have in attachment number 1 of this memo, and let us know the reason why you might need those funds. Also, this TIP policy that we have adopted allows you to also change the scope of work for a project, as long as you're not changing the inherent functionality of that project. And it also allows you to cancel one of your own projects and use those funds for the other project experiencing the cost overrun. So if you have a project that needs any of those things done, then we would ask that you fill out the questionnaire, again, attached to this. It's also on our website, and submit that to us before the end of the day on October 31st, so we can have it processed before next month's TAC meeting. So depending on how many entities have cost overruns, again, we only have so much money in the current fiscal year, so we will have to have a discussion on that to decide how to allocate that. But just want to let you know that that process is open, and you can submit that to us before the end of the month. Any questions on that? Okay. We've already received one, I think, from Palmer Lake, so I'm not sure. This is the first time we've actually gone through this process before since we've had this new policy. So we're all kind of learning as we go. But if you could get it to us before the end of the month, that would give us a lot of time to process it.
So it looks like on the left-hand column here, so that the quarters are October, January.
Oh, yeah, good question. Yeah. So I went ahead and created this table, and I'm going to put it on the website as well. But, yeah, this kind of gives you the timeline of when you can expect the next opportunity for cost overruns to be I will say that we are in the middle of a call for projects as well for the 2019 to 2024 TIP. And so we're using the unprogrammed funds from the current TIP for the next TIP. And so any funds that we take out of SDP Metro, for example, that would be probably the one that would be hit, that would take away from the money available for the next call for projects. So you have to just keep that in mind. But we can talk about that more next month once we actually see what projects are requesting money and where that money is coming from.
Was that 19 to 2022?
The next TIP, you're saying?
TIP?
Yep,
The next
19
one.
to 2022.
Okay.
It's not adding any new fiscal years. It's because right now we have our current TIP is 6 years, the next TIP is going to be 4. So we're just, the call for projects is just for the unprogrammed funds from the current TIP.
Tim?
So does it have to be from the same funding category? For example, have a safety project that's short?
Does it have to be from the same funding category where it's funded right now?
Yeah, like that was funded through HES.
Mm-hmm.
Metro monies be available for that?
Again, we haven't gone through this before, so I don't see why not. We don't have anything explicitly written in the rules that says you can't, as long as it's eligible from the federal regulations. I mean, I think that would be fine. We would have to have the discussion amongst the TAC and get that approved by all the committees, but yeah, there's nothing that says you cannot do that.
Okay.
Just, if there's a difference in the match requirement between what the existing project and whatever the new funds are that are being used, you'd have to meet the matching requirements for the new funds.
Oh, yeah.
That might be a different match rate. Yeah, this is the first time we've gone through this, so we've never established any criteria for how to decide between 2 or 4 or 6 projects who gets it. So that's come prepared to defend your project against everybody else's. And,
Okay. Probably overmatch will help.
And new TIP projects are due the end of November, correct?
The end of November, yeah. I was going to send out a reminder email kind of towards the end of this month. I think one of the things I wanted to remind everyone was, I have to talk with Wendy offline, but the guy you work with, his name is Scott? Yeah. So I think the understanding with the timeline is to have project sponsors work with Scott and really understand if the timeline that they have for their project is realistic, and he can kind of help with all that. So I'll send out an email with his contact information so everyone can reach out to him, because we want to make sure that there's coordination between CDOT early on, so we can avoid cost overruns and everything else.
Any other questions for Kevin? All right, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Okay, item 9, member entity announcements. Does anybody have anything to share? Wade.
I just want to take the opportunity to again introduce Taylor. Taylor will be acting as my alternate to this board. He's a city engineer for Manitou Springs, so you'll be seeing him more in the coming months.
All right.
That's all.
Good, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Items for future TAC meetings.
I'm sure there'll be a TIP amendment.
I have, for 2022, it'll come next month. We have to have it through the committees in November and then adopted by the board in December, January timeframe, so that we can make the joint TPR meeting and the STIP after the first of the year. Figure sooner than later.
Okay.
Jennifer?
Oh, you'll also start seeing some items related to the small area forecast very soon. No promises on whether that'll be next month, but if not, definitely you'll see something significant in December. So everybody start getting excited.
I think we already are.
Yeah.
And evaluation criteria and scoring,
We don't have all the targets approved yet.
well, that's true. Well, by our next TAC meeting, they should be, right?
Well, we can hope.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
We are working, we started working on it, but
Yeah.
we haven't been pushing it because everything is still kind of up in the air.
Right, right.
So is there something approved at the next board meeting? Would it then be before us?
I don't know if I'm going to be gone for a week and a half. I don't know if it'll come back in November or might be December. We've got the time, because before the call for projects, we want to have the evaluation criteria established. They're waiting. The funding that's available for the plan, the small area forecast, and putting all of our needs together. So we've got a little time, but we've got to keep moving forward.
All right. Sounds good. And thank you, everybody, again, for, reconsidering this infill target item, and really great attendance this month. So thank you for that. And Brandy, thanks for starting the meeting on time. Appreciate it. All right, anything else from anybody to share?
I guess I will share one thing, talking about the next board meeting. They did announce, for those that were in attendance or already heard this, the next board meeting in November, they will be interviewing candidates for the new executive director. It will be an open session. So if you're really, really interested in that, you may attend and listen to the interviews. There'll be about an hour and 15 minutes or something each. But it means that they are going to condense the normal business of the meeting as much as possible. So I will try to put the TIP amendment on the consent item. Depending on how the infill target goes, may or may not make consent item, depends on whether we wind up with the same recommendation from CAC as what TAC has made.
Could be a lengthy discussion
But
at the board.
they're going to limit business as much as possible to provide time for the interviews, because they still have the RTA meetings, and some of the board members are on the RTA board in the afternoon, so.
Yeah, that's true. All right, thank you. Okay, would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn? Second? Come on. Second.
Don't all rush.
All
I
right.
think this is something you can actually just declare.
I know. I don't know why I'm doing this, but usually I just say thank you, everybody. All right. Thanks. Have a good month.
Couldn't find that for the life of me. The design, I swear they always move stuff.
I go to
and-
it all the time. The thing is it's part of the 3-part engineering criteria manual.
Uh-huh.